The mansion stood tall at the edge of the city, shining with bright lights every night. Yet inside the walls it was silent, almost lifeless, because the man who owned it, a billionaire, lived alone with only his staff moving quietly through the halls. He had everything money could buy, expensive cars, endless rooms, rare art. But what he did not have was warmth. He felt the silence pressing against him each night, his footsteps echoing on marble floors, his voice bouncing back to him when he spoke to no one, and this loneliness ate at him like a shadow he could never escape. He noticed the maid more than the others. She worked quietly, never speaking more than necessary, her eyes always lowered, her hands always busy, yet her face carried something he could not ignore, a sadness, a story hidden behind every careful movement. He would sometimes see her pause near the window, staring at the night sky, as if asking the stars questions she could not ask anyone else. And in those moments he felt something stir inside him, a connection to someone who seemed even more trapped than himself. He did not know her past. He only knew she never smiled and never looked at him longer than a second. But he wanted to know more. One night after dinner the mansion was unusually quiet. Most staff had gone to their quarters. The lights dimmed in the long hallway. He walked past the kitchen and saw her standing alone, her hands pressed against the counter, her eyes closed like she was holding back tears. He stopped in the shadows, watching, his chest tightening as he wondered what pain she carried. He should have walked away, but something pulled him closer. He asked softly if she was all right. His voice breaking the silence. She turned quickly, her face pale, her hands trembling. She forced a small nod, but he could see the truth. She was not fine. He told her she did not need to hide, that he could see her pain. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but instead she shook her head and whispered that some truths were too heavy to share. Her voice cracked. He felt his heart twist. For years he had seen people fake smiles in front of him. But this was different. This was raw. He asked her to sit. She hesitated, afraid of breaking rules. But he insisted. They sat at the small table in the corner of the kitchen. The silence between them was heavy yet fragile. She looked at her hands, not at him. Then she spoke slowly, saying life had never been kind, saying she had learned to keep secrets because the world punished those who showed weakness. Her words cut into him. He had built walls of money to protect himself, but her walls were built from wounds. He reached for her hand but stopped, afraid of scaring her. Instead he said she was not alone, that he wanted to understand. Her eyes lifted just for a second, and in that second something passed between them, something unspoken. That night stretched longer than usual. Time itself seemed to pause as he listened to her broken sentences, half-truths mixed with silence. She never told him everything, but enough for him to feel the weight she carried. The mansion around them felt different, not cold, but alive with the quiet beating of two lonely hearts finding each other. Later, when she stood to leave, he asked her to wait. He told her he had always been surrounded by people but had never truly seen anyone until that night. His words made her freeze, her breath uneven. She whispered that some things once started could never be undone, and he said maybe some things were not meant to be undone. Maybe they were meant to happen. She lowered her gaze, her cheeks flushed. She wanted to walk away but her feet would not move. He stepped closer, his voice soft but steady. He told her that loneliness was a cage, and that night, with her, he wanted to break free. She looked at him then, truly looked, and the sadness in her eyes shifted, like a storm breaking to reveal fragile light. What happened after was not planned, it was not logical, it was human. Two souls lost in shadows finding a brief spark of warmth, and as the night deepened, walls crumbled, lines blurred, and one mistake, or maybe one destiny, bound them together forever. In the silence of the mansion, with only the moon as witness, the billionaire and the maid crossed a line that would change everything. He did not know then what the future would bring. He did not know that one night would plant seeds of both pain and love. He only knew that for the first time in years, he did not feel empty, and she, for the first time in years, allowed herself to feel seen. The night ended, but its echo remained, like a secret burned into the walls of the mansion. Something that could never be erased, something that would return one day to haunt them both. Though neither of them could imagine how the morning after that night the mansion looked the same from outside, its walls shining, its gardens trimmed, its windows spotless, but inside something had shifted. The billionaire woke up with a weight in his chest, a mixture of guilt and longing. He kept replaying her eyes, the way she had looked at him before silence took over. He tried to push it aside but the image would not leave him. He walked through the halls, his steps heavy, and when he saw her again she moved quickly, avoiding his gaze, her hands shaking as she cleaned the glass table. He wanted to speak, but the fear of breaking her fragile silence stopped him, yet every moment stretched longer, filled with questions neither dared to ask. The staff went about their day unaware of what had happened. But between the billionaire and the maid an invisible thread pulled tight. He sat in his study staring at papers he could not read, hearing only the echo of her whisper. Some truths are too heavy to share. He wondered what truths she hid, what storms had shaped her into this quiet woman. At lunch she placed a dish in front of him without looking up. He noticed how her fingers trembled as she set down the spoon. He reached out, his hand brushing hers by accident, and she froze, her breath catching. He whispered her name, soft enough that no one else could hear. But she quickly withdrew, retreating like a bird startled by sudden movement. The day dragged on. He tried to drown himself in work, meetings, calls, but everything blurred. That night, when the mansion went quiet again, he found himself walking the same hallways, as if drawn by unseen force, and again he found her. This time in the laundry room folding sheets, her face pale with exhaustion, her eyes rimmed with red. He stood at the door for a long moment, then stepped inside. She stiffened, her hands clenching the fabric. He told her he could not pretend nothing had happened, that he could not go back to emptiness after feeling alive for the first time. Her lips pressed tight. She shook her head. She said it was wrong, that she should not have stayed that night, but her voice broke halfway, betraying the truth in her heart. He asked why she always carried so much sorrow, what had been taken from her, and for the first time she looked at him with tears running freely. She whispered that life had stolen too much, that she had lost family, love, safety, everything she once thought would last, and that now she had nothing but this job. He listened in silence, every word carving deeper into him. He realized that behind her quietness there was a world of pain and survival. She confessed she had once trusted someone powerful, and that trust had destroyed her. She did not give details, only pieces, enough to paint a picture of betrayal and loss. The billionaire clenched his fists, anger boiling at faceless enemies. He told her she deserved more, that she deserved happiness, not endless nights of pain. She shook her head again, saying happiness was not for people like her. He stepped closer, his voice firm but gentle, telling her that she was wrong, that she had given him light when he thought he would never feel again. She broke down then, the sheets slipping from her hands, sobs shaking her shoulders. He caught her before she fell, holding her as she cried. And in that moment something unspoken bound them tighter. They were no longer master and servant. They were two souls clinging to each other in a storm. The night grew heavy around them, silence returning, but their hearts beating fast in the quiet. He knew he should let go, should step back, but he did not, and she did not pull away. Instead she rested against him, her tears soaking his shirt, her whispers barely audible, that she was scared, that she was not meant to belong anywhere. He told her she belonged here, with him, and though the words felt reckless, they also felt truer than anything he had ever said. When she finally pulled back, her eyes swollen, her voice trembling, she said he did not understand the cost, that one day he would, and it would change everything. Then she left the room, leaving him standing with the echo of her warning, his mind racing. He did not know what she meant, but he felt in his bones that she carried a secret, one that could shatter both their lives. He returned to his room unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling until dawn, haunted by her tears and her warning, knowing that the night had only just begun to change everything, and that the mansion's silence would never be the same again. The next days in the mansion moved like shadows. The billionaire carried himself through meetings, dinners, and business deals. But every time he closed his eyes he saw her face, pale and tired, her tears burning in his memory. The maid avoided him as much as she could. She slipped into rooms quietly, left quickly, her head always bent, and when their eyes accidentally met she looked away instantly. He felt the distance growing like a wall, yet beneath it was the memory of that night pulling them together. He could not understand her warning, those words she whispered before leaving, that one day he would understand the cost. He began to notice details he had never seen before. The way she sometimes clutched her stomach when she thought no one was watching. The way she skipped meals and hid it by pretending to be busy. The way she sometimes disappeared for hours, returning with red eyes. One evening, after the rest of the staff had left for the night, he walked through the garden and found her near the fountain, the moonlight glowing on her face as she sat with her knees drawn close. He stood in silence, watching her shoulders shake, hearing the soft sound of crying. He could not stay away. He moved closer, his shoes crunching on the gravel. She looked up startled, wiping her face quickly, but he saw the truth. He sat beside her without asking, the silence heavy between them. Finally he spoke, saying he did not care about rules or appearances. He wanted to know what burden she carried. She bit her lip, shaking her head, whispering that he could not handle it, that once he knew, he would turn away. He reached out, gently touching her arm, promising her that nothing could make him walk away now. Her eyes filled again, and after a long pause, she spoke in fragments. She said that years ago she had trusted someone powerful, a man who promised her protection and future, but he had left her with nothing but fear and scars. She said she had run far to escape, changing her life completely, and that was how she ended up in the mansion, hiding from a past that would never let her go. The billionaire listened, his heart tightening with every word. He wanted to ask more, but she stopped him, her voice breaking, saying the worst part had not been losing herself. The worst part had been losing what she loved most. She fell silent, her body trembling. He wanted to press, but the look in her eyes warned him that pushing would break her completely. Instead he told her she was safe now, that no one could hurt her anymore. She gave a bitter smile, whispering that safety was only an illusion. Then she stood and walked away, leaving him with more questions than answers. That night he could not sleep. The house felt colder, his thoughts louder. He wandered into his study, staring at the shelves, but every book reminded him of her broken voice. The next morning he called one of his most trusted investigators. He gave no details, only asked him to quietly look into the maid's past. He told himself it was for her protection, but deep down he knew it was also to feed his growing obsession. Days passed, tension rising. The maid kept her distance, but her sadness deepened. And then one afternoon, when the sky was heavy with rain, the investigator returned with a folder. The billionaire opened it with shaking hands. Inside were fragments of her life, old records, addresses, photographs, and in the middle a picture that made his blood freeze. The maid holding two small children, twins with bright eyes, standing in front of a shabby house. His mind spun, the paper slipping from his hands. He whispered to himself that it could not be true, but the resemblance was sharp, the timing too close. His heart pounded as realization slammed into him. That one night years ago had not been a mistake forgotten. It had left a mark, a truth hidden in silence. The children were his, and she had hidden them from him all this time. Rage and grief mixed inside him. But beneath it all was fear. Fear of why she had kept it secret. Fear of what else she had not told him. That night he searched for her in the mansion. But she was gone, her room empty, her clothes missing. No sign of where she had gone. Only the silence of the mansion. Louder than ever, he stood alone, the truth heavy in his hands, knowing that the secret she had carried had just shattered his world, and that from this point forward nothing would ever be the same. The mansion felt hollow without her. The billionaire walked through every hallway searching for a trace of her presence, but each room echoed with emptiness. Her perfume was gone, her folded clothes vanished, even the small hairpins she sometimes left on tables had disappeared. It was as if she had erased herself from his world overnight. Yet the folder with the photograph of her holding the twins sat heavy on his desk, burning into his mind. He stared at it for hours, his heart torn between anger, betrayal, and desperate longing. He asked himself why she had kept the children hidden, why she had never told him, and what kind of life they were living out there without him. He could not stay still. He called his investigator again, demanding every detail, every location, every whisper of where she might have gone. Days passed in. Restless, waiting until finally a call came through. The investigator had tracked her to the poorer part of the city, a street where people begged for food, a place where the lights of wealth did not reach. The billionaire left his mansion that night, for the first time in years stepping into the darkness of streets he never thought he would walk. The air smelled of smoke and desperation. Shadows clung to the walls, and he moved past broken shops and cracked pavements. His expensive shoes crunching on glass. Finally he saw them. Two small figures huddled near a street corner, holding a cardboard sign with shaky letters asking for food. Their clothes torn, their faces pale, but their eyes, those eyes struck him like lightning, wide and innocent, mirrors of his own. The twins, his twins, begging on the streets. His chest tightened so violently he could not breathe. He walked closer slowly, afraid that moving too fast would break the fragile reality in front of him. The children looked up at him, startled by the sight of a man in a tailored suit standing in their world of dirt and cold. One of them held the other's hand tighter, their voices soft, asking if he had spare change. His throat closed, tears burned his eyes. He knelt down in front of them, his voice trembling as he asked where their mother was. But the children only looked away, afraid, mistrustful. Their little faces hardened by struggle. He wanted to tell them everything, to scream that he was their father, that he would take them away from this pain. But his words froze because he saw her in the distance, the maid, their mother, standing near the shadows watching him with eyes full of fear and warning. She stepped forward quickly, pulling the twins close, her face pale as death. She whispered harshly for him to leave them alone. He rose to his feet, his voice cracking as he demanded to know why she had hidden them, why she had chosen to let them suffer like this when he could have given them the world. She shook her head, her voice shaking as she said the world he lived in was not safe for them, that money and power would destroy their innocence, that people in his circle would never let them live in peace. He clenched his fists, shouting that they were his children too, that he had the right to protect them. His words made the twins look up, confusion in their young eyes, and the maid pressed them against her, whispering for them to stay quiet, her tears streaming down as she begged him to walk away. The street grew still, even strangers paused to watch the scene. The rich man and the broken family colliding in the open. The billionaire felt rage boiling, but beneath it was a crushing sorrow. He had spent years surrounded by gold and marble only to find his true blood shivering on cold streets. He swore then that he would not let it end like this, that he would uncover every truth she was hiding, even if it meant tearing apart the walls she had built. But as he looked at her face, filled with terror not of him but of something darker behind her, he realized this was bigger than just secrets. Someone, somewhere, had forced her into this life of silence, someone powerful enough to make her believe even his protection would not be enough. He stepped back slowly, his heart breaking, the twins watching him with wide uncertain eyes. He whispered to them that he would come back, that he would not let them stay in the shadows forever. Then he turned and walked away, his fists clenched, his mind burning with questions, because he knew this was only the beginning of a war, and the truth, once uncovered, would change everything far more than he had imagined. The billionaire returned to his mansion, but it no longer felt like his home. The silence of the halls pressed heavier than ever. Every room reminded him of what he had seen. The twins on the cold street, their small hands clutching a cardboard sign, their faces pale and hungry. His blood boiled at the thought that his own children had lived in such misery while he sat surrounded by luxury. He poured himself a drink but could not swallow it. The taste of guilt was stronger than anything. He paced the floor of his study like a caged animal. The photograph of the maid holding the twins lay open on the desk. He stared at it again and again, his jaw tightening. He could not understand why she had chosen this suffering when he could have given them warmth, food, safety, yet her eyes that night had told him she was afraid of something beyond his reach. He began making calls, summoning lawyers, demanding background checks, trying to find every thread of her past that had been hidden, and slowly pieces began to surface, whispers of men in power, deals made in shadows, and a name that kept returning, a name tied to cruelty and betrayal, a man who once had control over her life, someone who had threatened her and the children if she ever reached out for help. The billionaire clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. Now he began to see why she had chosen silence. But the thought that she had borne this alone only deepened his anger. He could not allow this to continue. He swore to himself that he would pull her and the children out of this nightmare even if it meant burning bridges with the world he lived in. Days passed. He returned again to the streets, but she was gone. The corner where the twins had begged was empty. The broken cardboard sign lay trampled in the dirt. His heart sank. He searched the alleys, asked the people nearby. Some shook their heads. Others muttered that families often disappeared overnight, taken or forced to move, fear growing in their voices as they spoke. He realized they were hiding something. He offered money, but even that did not loosen their tongues. He drove back through the rain, his grip on the steering wheel tight, his mind racing with questions. At night he dreamed of the twins calling out for him, their voices echoing in the mansion's hollow rooms, and every morning he woke with sweat on his face. One evening his investigator returned again with news. He said the maid and her children had been seen entering a shelter on the edge of the city, a place for the desperate, guarded by men who answered not to kindness but to the shadows of powerful hands. The billionaire left at once, his car cutting through the night. When he reached the shelter, it was surrounded by crumbling walls and rusted gates. Inside, broken voices echoed, children crying, women whispering. He stepped in, the stench of poverty and fear hitting him, and there she was, sitting on a thin mattress with the twins pressed against her. Their eyes wide and tired, she looked up and froze, her face pale, her lips trembling as she whispered his name. He moved closer, but she raised her hand, begging him not to. She whispered that if he stayed longer, they would see, and if they saw, everything would collapse. He demanded to know who she meant, who she feared so much that she would rather let her children starve than let him help. She shook her head, tears falling, whispering that he did not understand, that the man who had broken her before was still watching, that his reach extended further than wealth or law. The billionaire's chest burned with fury. He swore that no one could stop him, that his children would not grow up like this, but she pleaded with him, her voice cracking, saying that if he fought openly the twins would be the ones to pay. Her desperation stopped him cold. He wanted to grab her hand, to take her away immediately, but her fear was too raw, too real, and for the first time he realized the battle ahead was not just about proving fatherhood. It was about survival. He left the shelter with fire in his heart, every step heavy, knowing that this war would not be fought with money alone, but with secrets, shadows, and a truth darker than anything he had faced before. As he drove back to the mansion, the rain slamming on the windshield, he swore he would not stop, that whatever power stood against them would fall, because no matter the cost, he would bring his children home. The storm outside the mansion raged all night, lightning flashing across the sky, but the storm inside the billionaire's heart was louder. He sat in his study with papers scattered everywhere, old records, names, numbers, files pulled from the shadows by his investigator. Every clue pointed to one man, a figure who had haunted the maid's past. A man with influence in politics, in business, and in the streets, someone untouchable by law, his name spoken in whispers, feared by those who knew him, and now that name echoed in the billionaire's head like poison. He realized why she had hidden for so long, why she had carried pain in silence, because this man's reach was long enough to choke her no matter where she went. But anger boiled in him stronger than fear. He could not accept that his children would suffer because of another man's cruelty. He poured himself into the search, sleepless nights, endless calls, tracing financial trails and hidden connections. Every piece of evidence added to his fury, and in those long hours he also thought of her, of the maid who had once been just a quiet figure in his mansion. Now the center of his broken heart. He remembered the way she cried, the way she clutched her children like they were the last shield she had, and it burned him that she had faced it all alone. One evening he returned to the shelter. But when he entered the small room where she had been, the mattress was empty, the twins were gone. The caretaker shook her head nervously, refusing to meet his eyes, saying only that they had left before dawn with men no one dared question. His blood turned to ice. He demanded names, but no one spoke. Fear tied their tongues. He slammed his fist against the wall, the sound echoing through the broken halls. He drove back through the night, every thought consumed with panic. Had she taken the children to hide again? Or had someone taken her? His phone rang, the investigator's voice urgent, saying there were whispers that the man from her past had found her, that his people had dragged her into hiding once more, this time tighter, darker, more dangerous. The billionaire gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He swore under his breath that no one would cage her again. He returned to his mansion, but the place felt like a prison, every wall reminding him of her absence. He stood before the grand windows, staring at the rain, promising himself that he would tear down whatever empire had stolen her away. Days turned into nights, his men searching everywhere, following rumors, and finally one of them returned with a story. A neighbor from the poor district had seen the twins sitting alone near a bakery, their mother nowhere in sight. The billionaire rushed there at once, and when he arrived he saw them, small and shivering, holding each other tightly as people walked past without care. His heart broke again. He knelt before them, whispering gently, asking where their mother was. The children looked up at him, their eyes filled with fear and confusion. One of them whispered that bad men had taken her away, that she told them to stay hidden. His chest clenched, rage burning through his veins. He gathered them into his arms, their small bodies fragile against him, and in that moment he swore they would never beg again. He carried them to his car, wrapping his coat around their shoulders, ignoring the stares of strangers. Back in the mansion he laid them in the softest beds, watching them sleep, their faces peaceful for the first time. And yet his heart remained restless, because their mother was still out there, in the hands of the same man who had broken her before. He stood in the doorway, his fists tight, his mind already preparing for war. He had wealth, power, and now he had purpose. No longer would he live in silence. No longer would he let the shadows win. He whispered to himself as the thunder cracked, that he would bring her back, that he would burn down every wall, crush every hand that dared touch her, because the war had begun, and nothing on earth could stop a father fighting for his family. The night turned into morning, but the billionaire did not rest. The twins slept quietly in the mansion's guest room, wrapped in blankets too soft for children who had known only cold streets. He stood outside their door for hours, listening to their breathing, his heart tightening every time one of them stirred. He had finally brought them into safety, but it felt incomplete. Because their mother was still missing, taken by the same shadows that had haunted her life for years. He walked back to his study, his eyes bloodshot, his desk covered with files, maps, and photographs. The name of the man who had stolen her repeated in his head like a curse. He had built an empire of fear, bribing officials, silencing witnesses, destroying anyone who stood against him. But the billionaire had something he never faced before: limitless resources and the unshakable rage of a father who had been denied his family. He began making calls not to lawyers this time, but to people who moved outside the light of law. Men who owed him favors, people who dealt in information that never reached newspapers. He offered money, protection, anything in return for names, addresses, secret hideouts, and slowly a net of secrets began to unfold, every thread leading closer to the man who held her. As the hours passed, he returned again and again to the twins, sitting with them when they woke, speaking softly, asking about their mother. But they only cried, whispering that she had told them to be brave, to wait. He promised them he would bring her back no matter what it cost. One evening as the sun fell, his investigator brought news. She had been moved to a hidden house on the outskirts of the city, guarded by men who were paid to keep their mouths shut. Without hesitation, the billionaire prepared, not with the calm patience of a businessman but with the fire of someone ready to burn everything down. He wore dark clothes, left the mansion with a small convoy, his car cutting through the night. When they reached the old house, he stepped out first, ignoring the warnings of his men. He walked up to the rusted gate, his voice hard as steel as he demanded to see her. Guards appeared, sneering, telling him to leave, but he did not step back. Instead, he pulled out a photograph of the twins, holding it high, his voice breaking with fury as he shouted that their mother was inside and he would not leave without her. The guards laughed, mocking, but the sound of engines roared behind as his men surrounded the place. The tension thick like smoke. One wrong move could set everything on fire. Finally, the door of the house creaked open, and she stepped out, her face pale, her wrists bruised, her eyes filled with both relief and terror. When she saw him, she froze, shaking her head, as if begging him to stop. He moved forward, but one of the guards shoved her back, warning him that she did not belong to him. The billionaire's rage exploded. His voice thundered as he declared she was the mother of his children, and no power on earth could keep her away now. The standoff grew dangerous. Guns glinted under coats, men shifting nervously, but his presence, his wealth, his power weighed heavy. Silence stretched until finally a voice from inside shouted for them to let her go. A voice filled with arrogance and menace, the voice of the man himself. Though he did not show his face, the guards hesitated, then pushed her forward roughly. She stumbled into his arms, her body trembling. She whispered in fear that he should not have come, that now everything would turn darker. But he only held her tighter, whispering back that it was already too late to fear. Because the war had begun, he took her into the car, his men surrounding them as they drove away. But in his heart he knew this was only the first battle. The man in the shadows would not stop, and the billionaire would have to destroy everything in his path to keep his family safe. As the city lights blurred past the windows, he looked at her fragile face resting against his shoulder and silently swore that no matter how much blood, money, or power it cost, he would bring an end to the nightmare once and for all. The ride back to the mansion was heavy with silence. The maid sat pressed against the door, her eyes wide and restless, her hands trembling as though she still felt the grip of the men who had held her. The billionaire sat close, his jaw clenched, his arm ready to shield her. He wanted to tell her it was over, that she was safe now, but the truth weighed like stone in his chest. It was not over, it had only begun. When they reached the mansion, the twins ran to her, their small feet rushing across the floor. Their cries filling the air as they wrapped their arms around her waist. She fell to her knees, pulling them close, sobbing into their hair. The billionaire watched from a step away, his chest burning. This was his family, and yet they were broken, fragile, cornered by fear. He swore he would not let them live in terror another day. That night he called his inner circle. Men who had worked with him for years in silence. Trusted partners who had built his empire. He told them everything, his voice cold. He spoke of the man who had tormented her, who had stolen years of life from her and forced his children to the streets. He said he would destroy him piece by piece, not just his body but the empire he had built. The men nodded, some afraid, some eager, but all loyal. Plans were drawn, accounts tracked, properties mapped, names listed. It was not a business strategy this time. It was war. In the days that followed, the billionaire stayed close to the maid and the twins. She spoke little, her eyes always moving toward the windows, as if expecting shadows to break through. One night he found her sitting in the dark hallway, hugging herself. He knelt beside her, telling her she did not have to be afraid anymore, that he would protect them. Her lips trembled as she whispered that he did not understand. The man he wanted to fight had roots deeper than power. He had allies in the law, in the underworld, in the highest towers of the city. She begged him to let it go, to run away with the children. But the billionaire shook his head, his voice firm, saying that running was not life, running was another kind of prison. He told her that only by ending it could they be free. Her eyes filled with tears. She said quietly that if he chose this path, blood would follow. He answered that blood had already been spilled, hers, their children's, and he would not allow it again. The next week his moves began. Bank accounts frozen, hidden deals exposed, allies bribed away. Slowly the man's empire cracked. Whispers spread in the city of a war between giants. And in the shadows men plotted revenge. One night the mansion's gates shook as black cars stopped outside. Men in dark coats stepping out. They did not speak, they only watched, sending a message that this battle would not be clean. The maid saw them from the window, her face drained of color. She turned to him, her voice breaking, saying that if he continued the children would be targeted. He looked into her eyes, his own burning with fury, and swore that no harm would ever touch them. His guards tightened security, the mansion surrounded by steel and guns, but still the air was heavy with danger. Every night the twins clung to their mother, afraid of footsteps in the dark, and he sat awake in his study with maps spread across the table, planning the next strike. When the call finally came, it was from an ally deep inside the enemy's circle. The man himself was coming out of hiding for the first time in years, meeting with his most trusted partners in a remote villa on the coast. The billionaire stood, his decision made. He would face him, not through lawyers or whispers, but face to face. He gathered his men, his convoy, and as dawn broke he left the mansion. The maid's trembling voice echoing in his mind as she whispered that if he went he would never return the same. But his heart had no space for fear now, only rage and love mixed into one fire. He knew this was the moment. The battle where either his family would be freed forever or lost to the shadows. And as the road stretched before him, his eyes fixed like steel, he swore silently that he would not lose. Not now, not after everything had already been taken. The road to the coast stretched endless under a gray sky. The billionaire sat in the back seat of his car, his eyes fixed forward, his fists resting tight on his knees. His men drove in silence, each one aware that this was not another business trip. This was war. The convoy moved like a line of shadows, black cars slicing through the early dawn mist. When they reached the villa it stood tall and isolated, perched on a cliff that overlooked the restless sea. Guards surrounded the walls, armed and alert, the kind of men who had killed without hesitation. The billionaire stepped out first, the wind whipping his coat. His eyes burning with fire, he walked toward the gates without slowing, his men behind him. The guards moved to block him, but he spoke with a voice that shook even the air, demanding to see the man who had stolen years of his life. The silence stretched, tension thick. Then the gates creaked open slowly and a man emerged, tall, dressed in a dark suit, his face sharp with arrogance, his smile cold, the very man who had haunted her life, the one she had feared even in the safety of the mansion. He stepped forward, clapping slowly, mocking, his words dripping with venom as he said it was brave for the rich man to come crawling into a lion's den. The billionaire's jaw tightened. He said he had come not for games, not for negotiations, but for what belonged to him, his family. The man laughed, his voice echoing across the stones. He said the maid had always been a fool, running, hiding, thinking she could escape his shadow. He said she belonged to no one, and the children, the twins, were nothing but bargaining chips. The billionaire's blood boiled, his hand twitched, but he kept his voice steady. He said those children carried his blood, they were his heirs, and he would tear down the world before letting them live under another man's control. The man sneered, stepping closer, whispering that money could not buy everything. That fear was stronger than gold. He spoke of men in high offices who bowed to him, of the streets that ran with his orders. He told the billionaire to walk away before he lost more than pride. But the billionaire stepped forward, his eyes locked, his voice low and cold, saying that the man had already taken too much, that the nights of silence, the years of pain, the tears of a mother and hunger of children, were debts that now had to be paid. The guards shifted nervously as tension thickened, both sides ready for violence. One wrong word could ignite it. Finally the man's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. He said the billionaire had made a mistake, that by coming here he had declared war not just on one man but on an empire. The billionaire leaned closer, whispering that an empire built on fear was already rotting, and he was the fire that would finish it. The two men stood face to face, the sea crashing below the cliffs, the guards gripping their weapons, the air thick with danger. Then the billionaire turned sharply, walking back toward his car, his men following, but his voice carried behind him, promising that this was only the beginning, that soon the man would see his empire fall brick by brick. The man shouted after him, mocking, but there was a crack in his tone, a flicker of unease, because he had seen something in the billionaire's eyes, something relentless, something that could not be bought or threatened, the fire of a father. The billionaire drove away, the storm rising in his chest. He knew this was no longer about secrets or fear. This was about war, and when he returned to the mansion, when he saw the twins sleeping and the maid sitting by their side with worry etched into her face, he bent down, kissed their foreheads, and swore aloud that he would end it. No matter how dark the path became, he would fight until there was nothing left of the man who had broken them, and the war that had begun in whispers would soon explode into fire that would burn. Across the city, the days after the confrontation with the man were filled with tension so thick it wrapped around the mansion like a dark cloud. The billionaire barely slept, his mind consumed with strategy. His men worked day and night, tracking every move of the enemy, every account, every ally, every hidden house where he stored his power. The maid moved quietly through the halls, her eyes still full of fear, clutching the twins every time they strayed too far from her sight. She warned him again and again to stop, to run, to disappear before the war consumed them. But he shook his head each time, his voice firm, saying that if they kept running they would never truly live. He told her he had lived in emptiness for years, and now that he had something real, a family, he would not surrender it. She wept silently at night, torn between fear of losing him and fear of what would come. Then the first strike landed. Businesses tied to the enemy suddenly collapsed, their accounts frozen by authorities who had been secretly swayed. Shipments vanished, partners betrayed him, and whispers spread in the city that the once untouchable man was bleeding. Enraged, the enemy struck back, his men ambushing one of the billionaire's convoys on a deserted road, bullets tearing through the night. But the billionaire's guards held strong, driving them away, leaving the road littered with the wreck of shadows. The war had turned visible, no longer hidden in whispers, it was now in blood. The city itself watched, waiting, terrified of what would come next. The billionaire knew there was only one way to end it. He had to cut the head of the snake. He planned carefully, drawing the enemy into a trap, leaks planted, whispers spread, until the man himself grew desperate enough to step into the open. The final meeting was set in an abandoned factory near the docks, a place reeking of rust and salt. The billionaire arrived with his men, his face cold as stone, the night heavy with rain. Inside the enemy waited with his guards, the air charged with hatred. The man sneered, shouting that the billionaire had ruined everything, that he would never forgive him. But the billionaire stood tall, his voice cutting through the storm, saying it was not about forgiveness. It was about justice for the woman he broke and the children he tried to destroy. Guns raised, tension exploded, the battle roared like thunder, shots cracked, steel clashed, men fell. The billionaire pushed forward. Through the chaos, his eyes fixed on the man, rage and love driving him stronger than bullets. At last they faced each other, fists colliding, bodies slamming against steel beams, the fight brutal, raw, years of cruelty meeting years of silent fury. The man mocked him with every breath. But the billionaire struck harder, shouting that fear would end tonight. The struggle ended with the man on the ground, broken, his empire already burning in pieces. His voice reduced to begging. But the billionaire's eyes held no mercy. He told him he had stolen enough lives, and now his power was finished. When it was over, the docks were silent except for the rain. The billionaire stood bleeding, his chest heaving, but alive, his men surrounding him, victory written in the collapse of shadows around them. By dawn the news had spread. The empire of fear was gone. Whispers replaced by shouts of relief. The billionaire returned to the mansion. His clothes stained, his body bruised. But when he stepped into the grand hall and saw the twins running to him, their little arms wrapping around his legs, and the maid standing with tears in her eyes, he felt something stronger than pain. He pulled them close, holding them as if he would never let go again. She whispered that he should not have risked everything. But he told her it was the only way, that now no shadow would ever touch them again. The mansion that once echoed with emptiness now echoed with laughter, with voices, with life. He knew the scars of the past would remain, but they would heal together. And as he stood at the window that night, the storm finally clearing, the city lights glowing in the distance, he whispered to himself that one night with his maid had changed everything. But finding his twins on the streets had given him purpose, and that purpose had saved them all. For the first time in years he did not feel alone. For the first time his heart was full.